I really appreciate being able to do this from a hybrid version. I would love to have been there, and that was the original plan, but I ended up teaching a 3-week intensive. And so I'm here back in Brandon, on the home of the Dene and Red River Métis, Dakota, Ojibwe, and Anishinaabe. Um, Kalin and I are part of a larger project that's looking at rural community broadband across the province. You'll see there at the bottom of the screen that there's a team of other researchers and partner organizations that have been part of this. And we're really excited to be able to sort of talk about this project. We're right in the middle of the project now. It's a community-based research project, and we're going to share a bit of what we've learned and what we are doing. And we will be showcasing, we're not wanting to steal any of Callan's thunder. He has more details that he'll be presenting at the poster presentation. Sounded like it right after this at the coffee break, right, Callan? Perfect. So I'm going to trust Callan to sort of give me cues because I can only see Callan. So if I'm talking too much or if there's questions or anything needed from the audience, Callan, I'll keep an eye on you and you just sort of raise your hand and let me know and we can sort of take a pause. So, but otherwise, I'm going to get underway. And so again, so this project, it's about empowering Manitoba, the community broadband initiatives, digital adoption and priorities for digital transformation in all corners of the province. So as we get underway and we're talking about this, we know that, there's been a lot of federal policy around the Universal Broadband Fund. There's not been very much at the provincial level, but there has been a lot of movement and investment in rural broadband, remote broadband, and northern broadband across Canada. And there's been definitely been some successes. However, it continues to be a challenge for much of our province, and we know for much of Canada as well. And what we're really wanting to do with this project, we're working with the Internet Society of Manitoba to really explore and understand what's happening across the province and to try and create, an inventory of community broadband initiatives and to share that information. So community broadband initiatives typically have taken place in Manitoba, and we know across Canada and internationally as well, when the current market system does not fill that gap for connectivity. So what we find is rural, northern, and remote communities often have to come up with their own solutions or build their own models or build their own sort of momentum to connect their community. So that, in our case in Manitoba, it's Rogers and Bell MTS and some other major telcos. If they have not provided connectivity to these rural spaces, northern spaces, or remote spaces, the communities are often forced or left to develop their own solutions. And I know this has been an ongoing, I've been working in this field for, oh my God, 20 years now. It's been an ongoing story. It's been an ongoing challenge. And while there's been lots of great sort of improvements with policy, there's still these ongoing challenges. And so what we really want to do with this project is understand the stories from a Manitoba perspective, start to talk to some of these communities, inventory, which communities have been successful, which haven't, and to be able to share their story for both impacting policy, impacting research, and also contributing so that other communities can learn from their neighbors in terms of how, if they need to, how they might be able to sort of develop their own community broadband initiative. And full disclaimer right from the start, from a policy and advocacy perspective, our perspective is that the rural communities should not be forced to do this on their own, and that they've been forced to fill this gap just by virtue of where they're located or what the market is currently delivering in their neighborhood. So again, the project, the focus is to inventory and mobilize knowledge about digital connectivity, adoption, and capacity building initiatives in underserved areas. So we have two major outcomes. One is that inventory, and one is to start to share the stories. And so we're going to talk about both of those things briefly. Next up, so these are 2022 numbers. Right now, this is, again, for most of you that are interested in this topic, this isn't anything new. This isn't anything surprising. Connectivity is fantastic in urban areas across Canada. It's poor in rural areas. It's really poor in First Nations communities. That's consistent across Canada, and it's consistent in Manitoba. Looking at the 2022 numbers, that we have here. We know that, just under half of rural areas are connected to sort of the target numbers. And again, these target numbers that we're using for these measurements, this is really the floor. This is really sort of the minimum target that we should be looking at. And only half of rural areas and only a quarter of First Nations communities in Manitoba are actually hitting that floor in terms of connectivity numbers. The other thing to know is that Manitoba is not doing well compared to its counterparts. So we rank, I think it was ninth across the country in terms of provinces, and that would be around, and I think the territories are below us as well. But again, Manitoba has been fairly consistently amongst the worst in Canada for connecting our rural areas, our northern areas, our remote areas, and our First Nations communities. So what we were doing to try and tell the stories, we're adapting a model of community connectivity that was created by Sarah. I don't know if you're still in the room, but Sarah Breen helped lead this out of Selkirk College. Ashley Whedon, who's a name that probably many of you know, they ran this through Selkirk College, and they developed a model that tried to organize the different types of community connectivity approaches and projects. Because what we've discovered, what we know about rural, once you've seen one rural place, you've seen one rural place. Well, the reality is, once you've connected one rural place, that model is not going to necessarily work for all rural places. So there have been different models developed by necessity, sometimes at the local level, sometimes at a regional level, to connect rural communities, northern communities, and remote communities to proper broadband service. Looking at this model, we wanted to see, they developed it in BC. We wanted to see how it applied to Manitoba. And so in Manitoba, we've started the inventory. So I'm one of the researchers in Manitoba that has been looking at rural broadband for sort of 10 plus years. The Internet Society of Manitoba is an advocacy group for connectivity, both in rural and urban spaces. So they're another sort of leading institution. Between the two organizations, RDI and ISOC, we were able to identify 50 ISPs that have existed or currently exist. And there's a story there that's about the acquisition and sort of the nature of how broadband ISPs at a local level, they sort of go through ebbs and flows, and they often, once they become successful, they get bought out by a larger entity. So Kalin actually tells that story a bit in his poster. So I'd encourage you to sort of follow up. We don't have time to sort of go into that here, but what we know is that there's been about 50 ISPs in the province, sort of small and medium ISPs that have been doing community connectivity. And so what we were wanting to do now is we continue to inventory these ISPs and get more information to identifying which model they are, identifying sort of where they're servicing. We also want to start telling the stories of some of these groups. So here's the poster that I was referring to. Again, it's probably up there nice and big, everyone can see it. You can get up close and personal with it at the coffee break. It should be up on the wall. After we're doing the inventory, which Kalin will talk more about in his poster, then we want to start sharing the story. And it's sharing the story of rural connectivity. I think that's really important for policymakers. It's really important for researchers, and it's really important for other communities that are struggling with connectivity. And what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to use a podcast, and we're going to actually use the podcast for two reasons. One, we're going to be using as a knowledge mobilization tool, so that we're going to share our findings on the models, for example. And we're going to share what's happening in these other communities. But we're also using the model to collect data. And so as we are doing community-based episodes, we're actually going to be working with the communities, and they're going to be designing the episode. They're going to be designing and sort of identifying the story that they want to share about their connectivity experience, whether that's in a rural space, a remote space, or a northern space. And so we really actually, as we're going through, we've spent a lot of time piecing out, the different episodes, and the core episodes are actually our data collection tool as well. And so we're hoping for 4 to 6 different community episodes that will be unique. They'll be designed with community members, community champions who were connected to their connectivity projects. And they'll be telling us what story and what elements they want to share and what they want to provide to other communities, what they want to emphasize for policymakers, and what they want to leave with researchers as well. And then we'll be wrapping that up with our research team to sort of unpack what we've learned, what was common, what was unique across those community episodes, and what policymakers can take away, what researchers can take away, and what other communities can take away. So at that, I'm going to toss it over to you, Kalin, to sort of showcase showcase our podcast. Now, I realize I've gone into, a bit of our podcast time, so you'll let me know when you want us to stop. But our podcast series is called Connected MB. And Kalin, if you want to talk a bit more about it and maybe give us 30 seconds about, because you've actually had to learn on the fly here as part of the research team too.
Yeah, definitely. At Brandon University, I actually opened up a new knowledge mobilization suite. So they allowed video conferencing, recording, as well as podcasting, as we have done here. And one of the cool things that kind of allowed us is obviously our priority is to try get to communities, but this also allows us to reach them if it's not possible due to time constraints, geographical issues, and it's great. Yeah, I have tried my best to learn it in the last month or so, but it's definitely an interesting experience. But with digital technology today, it's a lot easier because there's this software called Zencaster, and it allows us to connect to each participant individually, and it also records their audio, which we're allowed to splice into a single track, and it's great. And yeah, we also have this other online platform we're using called Frame.io, which allows the participants to view the editing in real time and make comments on kind of like YouTube, like you put a timestamp, and it's great just for allowing communities to have access and ownership over the material. And yeah, so far we've recorded 2 episodes. One is Freenet. It's kind of going over Manitoba's history of connectivity and how it was first transitioned from kind of a private institution research focus to kind of more internet and public use. So keep an eye out in a couple of weeks that will release. And we also have another episode with our own Sarah Breen and Ashley Wheaton. They've kind of help us introduce others to broadband and the rural connectivity models as well. So also keep an eye out for that.
Perfect.
And yeah,
Thanks.
and total we have at least planned 10 episodes with focus on communities and using the focus groups and turning those clips into the podcast. But we also have our team doing analysis episodes, which is going to be based on those community episodes. And we have, again, like experts like Sarah and Ashley, and we're getting a couple other people to help introduce people to broadband, the ecosystem. And you could probably play the clip now, Wayne.
Perfect. And before I do, I just want to give a big shout out to Kalin here because unlike many research projects, he's learning not just the research methodologies and how to do focus groups and ask, interviews with community members. He's also, as you've heard him sort of describe, he's also learned how to produce a podcast. So he's doing double duty on this project and he's been fantastic. But it is one of the realities of the challenges of sort of using these other knowledge mobilization technologies for doing research is somebody on the team has to have the capacity to be able to produce it. So he's been fantastic at sort of diving in and unpacking how do you actually produce and record a podcast virtually with multiple different interviewees. So on that, I know I only have 30 seconds here before I'm done. We'll just play the start of this clip. It's a full 2-minute clip that's from a draft episode. As Kalin said, you're going to find it up there soon. Sarah, I highlighted Ashley because I know you are in the room. So I thought I'd give Ashley a 30 seconds here to sort of give people a taste.
Because we're not collecting data about what it is that's happening, and then we're not doing anything to evaluate whether our interventions are working. So these community networks, these community high-speed networks.
So could you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we're not collecting data about what it is that's happening, and then we're not doing anything to evaluate whether our interventions are working. So these community networks, these community high-speed networks or broadband networks, whatever you want to call them, are a really useful point for actually getting that information and evaluating. Are people getting the service that they're paying for if you're previously with one of the big telcos? Because we have no way of capturing that right now. So how do you get a hold of that information and communicate it upwards for that accountability? Are people actually getting service that meets their needs, right? If you have businesses in your community, like we can't do anything, we're a printing press, we need gig simultaneous up and down. We can't function even on like 50/10 isn't good enough. So how did they get that service? Did they have to trench it and buy it themselves? Like getting that information then becomes really useful for an advocacy piece as well as understanding how you can meet your own needs.
So I'm going to stop it there. There's about another minute in that clip. And again, there's about an hour of that discussion, including Sarah's contributions, my contributions, and Joel Templeman, our partner's contributions. And that should be coming up soon. But that gives you an idea of the types of conversations that we're having at the research team level. And we're really looking forward. We're getting ready to get into community and have community stories be shared as podcasts as well. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I think I still have a couple minutes for questions. Is that correct, Kyle?